Section 57 of The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Qing in Singapore. The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 2 by Xueqin. Translated by Henry Bancroft Jolly. Chapter 53, Part 2. The next day he had, needless to say, still more things to give his mind to. Soon arrived the 29th day of the 12th moon, and everything was in perfect readiness. In the two mansions alike, the gate guardian gods and scrolls were renovated. The hanging tablets were newly varnished. The peach charms glistened like new. In the Ningguo mansion, every principal door, starting from the main entrance, the ceremonial gates, the doors of the large pavilions of the winter apartments, and inner pavilions, the inner three gates, the inner ceremonial gates, and the inner boundary gates, straight up to the doors of the main halls, was flung wide open. At the bottom of the steps were placed on either side large and lofty vermilion candles of uniform colour, which, when lit, presented the appearance of a pair of golden dragons. On the morrow, Dowager Lady Jia and those with any official status donned the court dress consistent with their grade, and taking first and foremost a retinue of inmates with them, they entered the palace in 8 barrel state chairs and presented their congratulations. After acquitting themselves of the ceremonial rites and partaking of a banquet, they betook themselves back and alighted from their chairs on their arrival in the winter hall of the Ning mansion. The young men who had not followed the party to court waited, arranged in a proper order, in front of the entrance of the Qing mansion, and subsequently led the way into the ancestral temple. But to return to Baoqing. This was the first occasion on which she put her foot inside to look at the inner precincts of the Jia ancestral temple, and as she did so, she scrutinized with minute attention all the details that met her gaze in the halls dedicated to their forefathers. These consisted, in fact, of a distinct courtyard on the west side of the Ning mansion. Within the balustrade, painted black, stood 5 apartments. Over the main entrance to these was suspended a flat tablet with the inscription in 4 characters, Ancestral Hall of the Jia family. On the side of these was recorded the fact that it had been the handiwork of Wang Xixian, specially promoted to the rank of Grand Tutor of the Heir Apparent, and formerly Chancellor of the Imperial Academy. On either side was one of a pair of scrolls bearing the motto, "Besmear the earth with your liver and brains, all ye people, out of gratitude for the bounty of the Emperor's protection." The reputation of the Jia family reaches the very skies. 100 generations rejoice in the splendor of the sacrifices accorded them. This too had been executed by Wang, the Grand Tutor. As soon as the court was entered, a raised road was reached, paved with white marble, on both sides of which were planted deep green fir trees and kingfisher green cypress trees. On the moon-shaped platform were laid out antiquities, tripods, libation vases, and other similar articles. In front of the antechamber was hung a gold-colored flat tablet with 9 dragons and the device, "Like a dazzling star is the statesman who assists the emperor." This was the autograph of a former emperor. On both sides figured a pair of antithetical scrolls with the motto, "Their honors equal the sun and moon in luster. Their fame is without bounds. It descends to their sons and grandsons." These lines were, likewise, from the imperial pencil. Over the 5-roomed main hall was suspended a tablet, inlaid with green, representing wriggling dragons. The sentiments consisted of, "Mindful of the remotest and heedful of the most distant ancestors." A pair of antithetical scrolls was hung on the sides, on which was written, "After their death, their sons and grandsons enjoying their beneficent virtues. Up to the very present, the masses think of the Rong and the Ning families." Both these mottos owed their origin to the imperial pencil. Inside, lanterns and candles burned with resplendent brightness. Embroidered curtains and decorated screens were hung in such profusion that though a large number of ancestral tablets were placed about, they could not be clearly discerned. The main thing that struck the eye was the inmates of the Jia mansion standing about on the left and right, disposed in the proper order. Jia Jing was the overseer of the sacrifices. Jia She played the part of assistant. Jia Zhen presented the cups for libations. Jia Lian and Jia Zong offered up the strips of paper. Baoyu held the incense. Jia Chang and Jia Ling distributed the hassocks and looked after the receptacles for the ashes of joss sticks. The black-clad musicians discoursed music. The libation cups were offered thrice in sacrifice. These devotions over, paper money was burnt, and libation of wine were poured. After the observance of the prescribed rites, the band stopped and withdrew. The whole company then pressed around dowager Lady Jia and repaired to the main hall, where the images were placed. The embroidered curtains were hung high up. The variegated screens shut in the place from view. The fragrant candles burned with splendor. In the place of honor of the main apartment were suspended the portraits of two progenitors of the Ning and the Rong, both of whom were attired in costumes ornamented with dragons and clubs with bells of jade. On the right and left of them were also arrayed the likenesses of a number of eminent ancestors. Jia Xing, Jia Zhi, and the others of the same status stood according to their proper grace, in a row extending from the inner ceremonial gate straight up to the veranda of the main hall. Outside the balustrade came at last Jia Jing and Jia She. Inside the balustrade figured the various female members of the family. The domestics and pages were arrayed beyond the ceremonial gate. As each set of eatables arrived, they transmitted them as far as the ceremonial gate, where Jia Xing, Jia Zhi, and his companions were ready to receive them. From one to another, they afterwards reached the bottom of the steps and found their way into Jia Jing's hands. Jia Rong, being the eldest grandson of the senior branch, was the only person who penetrated within the precincts of the balustrade reserved for the female inmates. So whenever Jia Jing had any offerings to pass on, he delivered them to Jia Rong, and Jia Rong gave them to his wife, who again handed them to Lady Feng, Mrs. You, and the several ladies. And when these offerings reached the sacrificial altar, they were at length surrendered to Madame Wang. Madame Wang thereupon placed them in dowager Lady Jia's hands, and old Lady Jia deposited them on the altar. Madame Xing stood on the west-east side of the sacrificial altar, and along with old Lady Jia, she offered the oblations and laid them in their proper places. After the vegetables, rice, soup, sweets, wine, and tea had been handed up, Jia Rong eventually retired outside and resumed his position above Jia Qing. Of the male inmates whose names were composed with the radical wen, literature, Jia Jing was at the time the head. Below followed those with the radical yu, gem, led by Jia Zhen. Next to these came the inmates with the radical cao, wrath, headed by Jia Rong. These were arranged in proper order, with due regard to left and right. The men figured on the east, the women on the west. When dowager Lady Jia picked up a joss-stick and prostrated herself to perform her devotions, one and all fell simultaneously on their knees, packing up the 5 rooms principal pavilion, the inside as well as the outside of the 3 antechambers, the verandas, the top and the bottom of the stairs, the interior of the 2 vermilion avenues, so closely with all their fineries and embroideries that not the slightest space remained vacant among them. Not so much as the call of a roe struck the ear. All that was audible was the report of jingling and tinkling, and the sound of the gold bells and jade ornaments slightly rocked to and fro. Besides these, the creaking noise made by the shoes of the inmates while getting up and kneeling down. In a little time, the ceremonies were brought to a close. Jia Jing, Jia She, and the rest hastily retired and adjourned to the Rong mansion, where they waited with the special purpose of paying their obeisance to Dowager Lady Jia. Mrs. You's drawing rooms were entirely covered with red carpets. In the centre stood a large gold cloisonné brazier with 3 legs in imitation of rhinoceros tusks, washed with gold. On the stove couch in the upper part was laid a new small red hair rug. On it were placed deep red back cushions with embroidered representations of dragons, which were embedded among clouds and clasped the character longevity, as well as reclining pillows and sitting rugs. Covers made of black fox skin were moreover thrown over the couch, along with skins of pure white fox for sitting cushions. Dowager Lady Jia was invited to place herself on the couch, and on the skin rug spread on either side, 2 or 3 of the sisters-in-law, of the same standings as old Lady Jia, were urged to sit down. After the necessary arrangements had been concluded, skin rugs were also put on the small couch, erected in a horizontal position on the near portion of the apartments, and Madame Xing and the other ladies of her age were motioned to seat themselves. On the 2 sides stood, face to face on the floor, 12 chairs carved and lacquered, over which were thrown antimacassars and small grey squirrel rugs of uniform colour. At the foot of each chair was a large copper foot stove. On these chairs, Bao Qing and the other young ladies were asked to sit down. Mrs. You took a tray, and with her own hands she presented tea to old Lady Jia. Jia Rong's wife served the rest of the seniors. Subsequently, Mrs. You helped Madame Xing too and her contemporaries, and Jia Rong's wife then gave tea to the various young ladies, while Lady Feng, Li Wan, and a few others simply remained below, ready to minister to their wants. After their tea, Madame Xing and her compeers were the first to rise and come and wait on Dowager Lady Jia while she had hers. Dowager Lady Jia chatted for a time with her old sisters-in-law, and then desired the servants to look to her chair. Lady Feng thereupon speedily walked up and supported her to rise to her feet. The evening meal had long ago been got ready for you, venerable ancestor. Mrs. You smiled. You've, year by year, shown no desire to honour us with your presence, but tarry a bit on this occasion, and partake of some refreshment before you cross over. Is it likely, in fact, that we can't come up to that Go Feng? Go on, worthy senior, laughed Lady Feng, as she propped old Lady Jia. Let's go home and eat our own. Don't heed what she says. In what bustle and confusion aren't you in over there? Smiled Dowager Lady Jia. With all the sacrifices to our ancestors, and how could you stand all the trouble I'm putting you to? I've never, furthermore, had every year anything to eat with you, but you've always been in the way of sending me things. So isn't it as well that you should again let me have a few? And as I'll keep for the next day what I shan't be able to get through, won't I thus have a good deal more? This remark evoked general laughter. Whatever you do, she went on to enjoin her, mind you, depute some reliable persons to sit up at night and look after the incense fires, but they mustn't let their wits go wool-gathering. Mrs. You gave her to understand that she would see to it, and they sallied out at the same time into the fore part of the winter apartments. And when Mrs. You and her friends went past the screen, the pages introduced the bearers, who shouldered the sedan and walked out by the main entrance. Then, following too in the track of Madame Xing and the other ladies, Mrs. You repaired in their company into the Rong mansion. Dowager Lady Jia's chair had, meanwhile, got beyond the principal gateway. Here again were deployed, on the east side of the street, the bearers of insignia, the retinue and musicians of the Duke of Ningguo. They crammed the whole extent of the street. Comers and goers were alike kept back. No thoroughfare was allowed. Shortly, the Rong mansion was reached. The large gates and main entrances were also thrown open straight up to the very interior of the compound. On the present occasion, however, the bearers did not put the chair down by the winter quarters, but passing the main hall and turning to the west, they rested it on their arrival at the near side of Dowager Lady Jia's principal pavilion. The various attendants pressed round old Lady Jia and followed her into her main apartment, where decorated mats and embroidered screens had also been placed about, and everything looked as if brand new. In the brazier, deposited in the centre of the room, burnt fir and cedar incense, and 100 mixed herbs. The moment Dowager Lady Jia ensconced herself into a seat, an old nurse entered and announced that the senior ladies had come to pay their respects. Old Lady Jia rose with alacrity to her feet to go and greet them, when she perceived that 2 or 3 her old sisters-in-law had already stepped inside. So, clasping each other's hands, they now laughed and now they pressed each other to sit down. After tea, they took their departure, but Dowager Lady Jia only escorted them as far as the inner ceremonial gate, and, retracing her footsteps, she came and resumed the place of honor. Jia Jing, Jia She, and the other seniors then ushered the various junior male members of the household into her apartments. "I put you," smiled old Lady Jia, "to ever so much trouble and inconvenience, from one year's end to another, so don't pay any obeisance." But while she spoke, the men formed themselves into one company, and the women into another, and performed their homage, group by group. This over, armchairs were arranged on the left and on the right, and on these chairs they too subsequently seated themselves according to the seniority and gradation to receive salutations. The men and women servants, and the pages and maids employed in the 2 mansions then paid, in like manner, the obeisance consonant with their positions, whether high, middle, or low. And this ceremony observed, the New Year money was distributed, together with purses, gold and silver ingots, and other presents of the same description. A rejoicing together banquet was spread. The men sat on the east, the women on the west. Tu Su, New Year's Day wine, was served, also rejoicing together soup, propitious fruits, and as-you-like cakes. At the close of the banquet, Dowager Lady Jia rose and penetrated into the inner chamber with the purpose of effecting a change in her costume, so the several inmates present could at last disperse and go their own way. That night, incense was burnt and offerings presented at the various altars to Buddha and the kitchen god. In the courtyard of Madame Wang's main quarters, paper horses and incense for sacrifices to heaven and earth were all ready. And the principal centre of the garden broad vista were suspended horn lanterns, which, from their lofty places, cast their bright rays on either side. Every place was hung with street lanterns. Every inmate, whether high or low, was got up in gala dress. Throughout the whole night, human voices resounded confusedly. The din of talking and laughing filled the air. Strings of crackers and rockets were let off incessantly. The morrow came. At the 5th watch, Dowager Lady Jia and the other senior members of the family donned the grand costumes, which accorded with their status, and with a complete retinue, they entered the palace to present their court congratulations. For that day was, in addition, the anniversary of Yuan Chun's birth. After they had regaled themselves at a collation, they wended their way back, and, betaking themselves also into the Ning mansion, they offered their oblations to their ancestors, and then returned home and received the conventional salutations, after which they put off their fineries and retired to rest. None of the relatives and friends who came to wish the compliments of the season were admitted into old Lady Jia's presence, but simply had a friendly chat with Mrs. Xue and sister-in-law Li, and studied their own convenience. Or along with Baoyu, Baochai, and the other young ladies, they amused themselves by playing the game of war or dominoes. Madame Wang and Lady Feng had, one day after another, their hands full with the invitations they had to issue for the New Year wine. In the halls and courts of the other side, theatricals and banquets succeeded each other, and relations and friends dropped in an incessant string. Bustle reigned for 7 or 8 consecutive days before things settled down again. But presently the festival of the full moon of the first month drew near, and both mansions, the Ning as well as the Rong, were everywhere ornamented with lanterns and decorations. On the 11th, Jia She invited Dowager Lady Jia and the other inmates. On the next day, Jia Zhen also entertained his old senior and Madame Wang and Lady Feng. But for us to record on how many consecutive days the invitations were extended to them to go and drink the New Year wine would be an impossible task. The 15th came. On this evening, Dowager Lady Jia gave orders to have several banqueting tables laid in the main reception hall, to engage a company of young actors, to have every place illuminated with flowered lanterns of various colors, and to assemble, at a family entertainment, all the sons, nephews, nieces, grandchildren, and grandchildren's wives, and other members of the 2 mansions of Ning and Rong. As, however, Jia Jing did not habitually have any wine or take any ordinary food, no one went to press him to come. On the 17th he hastened, at the close of the ancestral sacrifices, out of town to chasten himself. In fact, even during the few days he spent at home, he merely frequented retired rooms and lonely places, and did not take the least interest in any single concern. But he need not detain us any further. As for Jia She, after he had received Dowager Lady Jia's presents, he said good-bye and went away. But old Lady Jia herself was perfectly aware that she could not conveniently tarry any longer on this side, so she too followed his example and took her departure. When Jia She got home, he, along with all the guests, feasted his eyes on the illuminations and drank wine with them. Music and singing deafened the ear. Embroidered fineries were everywhere visible, for his way of seeking an amusement was unlike that customary in this portion of the establishment. In Dowager Lady Jia's reception hall, 10 tables were meanwhile arranged. By each table was placed a teapoy. On these teapoys stood censers and bottles, 3 things in all. In the censers was burnt Baihe Palace incense, a gift from His Majesty the Emperor. But small pots, about 8 inches long, 4 to 5 inches broad, and 2 or 3 inches high, adorned with scenery in the shape of rockeries, were also placed about, all of which contained fresh flowers. Small foreign lacquer trays were likewise being seen, laden with diminutive painted teacups of antique ware. Transparent gold screens with frames of carved black wood, ornamented with a fringe representing flowers and giving the text of verses, figured too here and there. In different kinds of small road vases were embroidered together the 3 friends of winter, pine, bamboo, and plum, as well as jade haw, happiness and honor, and other fresh flowers. At the upper 2 tables sat sister-in-law Li and Mrs. Xue. On the east was only laid a single table, but there as well were placed carved screens covered with dragons, and a short low-fitted couch with a full assortment of black cushions, reclining cushions, and skin rugs. On the couch stood a small teapoy, light and handy, of foreign lacquer, inlaid with gold. On the teapoy were arrayed cups, bowls, foreign cloth napkins, and such things, but on it spectacle case was also conspicuous. Dowager Lady Jia was reposing on the couch. At one time she chatted and laughed with the whole company. At another she took up her spectacles and looked at what was going on the stage. "Make allowances," she said, "for my old age. My bones are quite sore, so if I be a little out of order in my conduct, bear with me, and let us entertain each other while I remain in a recumbent position." Continuing, she desired Hu Po to make herself comfortable on the couch, and take a small club and tap her legs. No table stood below the couch, but only a high teapoy. On it were a high stand with tassels, flower vases, incense burners, and other similar articles. But a small high table, laden with cups and chopsticks, had besides been got ready. At the table next to this, the four cousins, Baoqing, Xiangyun, Daiyu, and Baoyu, were told to seat themselves. The various viands and fruits that were brought in were first presented to Dowager Lady Jia for inspection. If they took her fancy, she kept them at the small table, but once tasted by her, they were again removed and placed on their table. We could therefore safely say that none but the four cousins sat along with their old grandmother. The seats occupied by Madame Xing and Madame Wang were below. Lower down came Mrs. You, Li Wan, Lady Feng, and Jia Rong's wife. On the west sat Baochai, Li Wen, Li Qi, Xueqin, Ying Chun, and the other cousins. On the large pillars on either side were suspended in groups of 3 and 5 glass lanterns ornamented with fringes. In front of each table stood a candlestick in the shape of drooping lotus leaves. The candlesticks contained colored candles. These lotus leaves were provided with enameled springs of foreign make, so they could be twisted outward, thus screening the rays of the lights and throwing them on the stage, enabling one to watch the plays with exceptional distinctness. The window frames and doors had all been removed. In every place figured color fringes and various kinds of court lanterns. Inside and outside the verandas and under the roofs of the covered passages, which stretched on either side, were hung lanterns of sheep horn, glass, embroidered gauze or silk, decorated or painted, of satin or of paper. Round different tables sat Jia Zhen, Jia Lian, Jia Huan, Jia Zong, Jia Rong, Jia Qing, Jia Yun, Jia Chang, Jia Ling, and other male inmates of the family. Dowager Lady Jia had, at an early hour, likewise sent servants to invite the male and female members of the whole clan, but those advanced in years were not disposed to take part in any excitement. Some had no one at the time to look after things. Others, too, were detained by ill health, and much though these had every wish to be present, they were not, after all, in a fit state to come. Some were so envious of riches and so ashamed of their poverty that they entertained no desire to avail themselves of an invitation. Others, what is more, fostered such a dislike and stood in such awe of Lady Feng that they felt bitter towards her and would not accept. Others again were timid and shy, and so little accustomed to seeing people that they could not muster sufficient courage to come. Hence it was that, despite the large number of female relatives in the clan, none but Jia Lan's mother, née Lo, who brought Jia Lan with her. In the way of men, there were only Jia Qing, Jia Yun, Jia Chang, and Jia Ling. The 4 of them, and no others. The managers, at present under Lady Feng's control, were, however, among those who accepted. But albeit there was not a complete gathering of the inmates on this occasion, yet, for a small family entertainment, sufficient animation characterized the proceedings. About this time, Lin Zhixiao's wife also made her appearance, with half a dozen married women who carried 3 divan tables between them. Each table was covered with a red woolen cloth, on which lay a lot of cash, picked out clean and of equal size, and recently issued from the mint. These were strung together with a deep red cord. Each couple carried a table, so there were in all 3 tables. Lin Zhixiao's wife directed that 2 tables should be placed below the festive board, round which were seated Mrs. Xue and sister-in-law Li, and that one should be put at the foot of Dowager Lady Jia's couch. "Place it in the middle," old Lady Jia exclaimed. "These women have never known what good manners mean. Put the table down." Saying this, she picked up the cash, and loosening the knots, she unstrung them and piled them on the table. The reunion in the western chamber was just being sung. The play was drawing to a close. They had reached the part where Yu Shuye runs off at night in high dudgeon, and Wen Bao jokingly cried out, You go off with your monkey up, but, as luck would have it, this is the very day of the 15th of the first moon, and the family banquet is being given by the old lady in the Rongguo mansion. So wait, and I'll jump up on this horse and hurry in and ask for something to eat. I must look sharp." The joke made old Lady Jia and the rest of the company laugh. "What a dreadful impish child!" Mrs. Xue and the others exclaimed. "Yet, poor thing!" "This child is only 9 years of age," Lady Feng interposed. "He has really made a clever hit," Dowager Lady Jia laughed. "Tip him!" she shouted. This shout over, 3 married women who had previously got ready several small wicker baskets came up as soon as they heard the word tip, and taking the heaps of loose cash piled on the table, they each filled a basket full, and issuing outside, they approached the stage. "Dowager Lady Jia, Mrs. Xue, and the family relative, Mrs. Li, present Wen Bao this money to purchase something to eat with," they said. At the end of these words, they flung the contents of the baskets upon the stage. So all then that fell on the ear was the rattle of the cash flying in every direction over the boards. Jia Zhen and Jia Lian had, by this time, enjoined the pages to fetch big baskets full of cash and have them in readiness. But, as, reader, you do not know as yet in what way these presents were given, listen to the circumstances detailed in the subsequent chapter. End of section 57. Recording by Cao Yuqing in Singapore.